Lovely. So that's us live. I am Dr. Claire Gilfray from Cognitive Sports Therapy, and I am really pleased to be joined today by Julie Webb, who is known as the existentialtherapist.com. And I've known Julie for quite a long time now. You work as a psychotherapist, counsellor, supervisor, within the sort of Cambridge area, don't you, Julie? And you've worked there for years, so you've got a lot of experience in working with students, because Cambridge is a massive student city, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we've been doing sort of student mental health this week because it was University Mental Health Day last week, and I felt like it deserved a bit more attention than just one day, because well, I guess we know the statistics around student mental health, and it feels like not necessarily about COVID. I don't know what your take is on this, but generally student mental health has been deteriorating, whether that's just awareness of it, but it definitely feels like it might be deteriorating. And then we've also got then COVID has come in on top of it. What's your kind of take from what you're seeing as a therapist or counsellor?
I've been working with students independently at Cambridge University and Anglia Ruskin, and actually worked for 4 years with Anglia Ruskin student counselling services as well, right up until August last year. So saw a lot of students through the pandemic as well, that early part. And students, I mean, it's a huge transition into university life anyway for students. It's a real kind of rites of passage almost, and that growing space between 18 and 21, 22, 24, and of course you have mature students too, but by and large that's our cohort, and international students. So we have young people a long way from home,
and their supports,
their whole support system, which is a huge transition. The last 2 years with COVID, of course, there was an overwhelming experience of loss, in terms of loss and grief, loved ones, illness, suffering, struggle, loss of identity, and a loss of expectation. They had this, there's an expectation, when young people are coming into university life, and they have this picture and vision of what it's going to be. And of course, particularly in the pandemic, that was just not the picture at all that they stepped into. And many of them found it isolating, confusing, perplexing. They're not making the cohorts of friendships that they were hoping for. They're not bonding at all, and not having lectures in situ made their learning experience as well really challenging.
So I think you and I have chatted about it through the pandemic, and I think there are certainly some people towards the beginning that actually seemed to be almost doing better by it. So it was taking away some of that anxiety, that social anxiety, that some people were struggled with or were worried about with their university experience. But I don't know about you, but now that we're kind of coming out the other side of that group then are really finding it hard, because they had got to a certain point by having to be around people and socializing, and then they've had a period where they've been able to kind of step back into themselves again, and they're having to relearn how to go back out into the social world.
And relearn on a very different footing, because they are wanting to go either further into education or into the workplace. And the workplace is also very challenging right now as well. So a huge experience change and mismatch with expectation. But all of it is an underlying anxiety. And I think you're quite right. Any students that came in feeling anxious anyway, any person actually over the last 2 years who felt anxious at all, the pandemic was a bit of a gift in some respects. We were able to hide, be comfortable, not have to step out. And now we are. And it feels like a double whammy, a really big ask. And that anxiety, which is the main theme, I think, for students, regardless of what particular context, procrastination, eating disorders, identity crisis, anxiety is at the root.
Yeah.
Because anxiety is the fear of whatever it is that's going on, and the overwhelm in the body. And students that certainly come through the counselling service are really challenged in being equipped with dealing with this overwhelm in the body.
Yeah.
That is fear.
And I think the other side of this is the counselling service available to cope with that? Because I sort of read these reports of increased waiting times and this sort of that not just being to do with student counselling services, but to do with the NHS and what we're able to offer as well.
Yep.
And there just is this post-COVID waiting time that now seems to exist. So what do you...
Well, there are waiting lists everywhere, aren't there, for everything. Counselling services move as fast as they can. And because there is a waiting list, and we certainly at Anglia Ruskin I can speak of, and Cambridge, there are, quite high numbers of counsellors and practitioners as well to aid them in varying levels as well, from mental health advisors to counsellors and support. But they also the services offer lots of information, signposting, workshops, which are great because we bring people together then in groups.
So sort of holding things, isn't it? There's things
it is about how do we hold, and drop-ins, so they can drop in the moment if there is crisis. So actually they're very well supported. Very well supported.
Good, because I think it's not necessarily all about numbers. It feels like the complexity of what's going on for people has increased as well. So every individual person who's in there looking for help possibly needs more help than what they maybe previously did.
Yes, and maybe different help, which is why there is an array of different services and signposted and links with external services as well, of course, if it's severe crises.
So I know that whenever we were talking about doing this beforehand, I like these kind of videos to be of some help to people who are watching. So I think you felt like there was maybe some little bits of advice or tips that you could give to
Well, I have a couple of tips and I have a couple of recommendations as well for books. I don't know if we have time for that, but my tip really is a take on the cognitive behavioural therapy thought record, which can be lengthy, but it's the elastic band. When there's the anxiety arises in the body first and foremost, we feel that, and then all kinds of thoughts get attached to it, and kind of then it's a double whammy and gets big. When that negativity sets in, if you're wearing an elastic band, twang the elastic band, two things will happen. The first thing is it'll hurt. The second thing is that will remind you, I can respond differently. I can think something differently. So when a student is down that negative spiral of, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, whatever the negative is, engage with it, write that down. Write down the complete opposite. I am more than good enough. I can do this. To give yourself an opportunity to think the opposite. Because often we get stuck in the negative, and look at all the options in between. Do you know what? When we get a wider perspective, we gain a psychological distance from it. And the problem with anxiety, if we just stay locked in, it just spirals down into the body.
It needs to come out somewhere, doesn't it? It needs to come out.
So we need to kind of be expansive and lean into the anxiety. There's no life without anxiety. And I just find that it is about engaging in a practice. And if you can catch those moments on a regular basis, it builds something. It changes something.
The other reason I think you and I linked up right back at the beginning was this. I think you were doing yoga teacher training, or were interested in the yoga mindset as well. And I think I often advocate breath work for anxiety.
In that moment of overwhelm, we have to be really practical. We've got to breathe. So if the overwhelm is accelerated to such an extent you have to just stop and breathe, well, then that's what you have to do. But often, as well, with a negative mindset, the thoughts that kind of can come flooding through, if we can catch those, that will also help. But yes, breathing, all the normal tips, breathing, go outside, eat well, sleep well. Yeah.
And those last two are really key, I think, because I think the life of a student is sometimes not involving a lot of sleep and not involving, it's chaotic and not necessarily eating in the way that we should be eating. And those are real basic human needs, aren't they? That if we don't get them right, it just impacts on the rest of us.
It really does. But I think, you brought up the yoga and breath work. I think there's something really important, as an existentialist, really recognizing that there's no life without anxiety.
Yeah.
We're alive and the anxiety is telling us something. We can be really creative with it.
Yeah.
And I think if we can be creative with it and see it in a different frame, know that it's here, lean into it.
Yeah.
Actually it could really work for us too.
Yeah.
It can be really powerful.
No, I often talk to people about that, about how some of the most anxious people are actually the most productive people, because as you say, that all these kind of tendencies that we almost try and push away and pretend they don't exist or see them as weaknesses often come with strengths attached to them, like they're useful.
Exactly. And I think it's about creating the habit of that. So if I'm on a diet and there's a great big slice of chocolate cake in front of me, if I try and deny the cake, it just gets bigger, right? So that chocolate that's in the fridge, that's there is nagging. But if I, look at the cake, give it a nod and a wink, acknowledge its presence, but over here, reach for an apple, I'm suddenly creating a new habit. I do that often enough. This habit is up here. The cake hasn't had to do anything. It's just there. And I think creating the habits is really key where anxiety is concerned.
It's back to that relearning almost again, isn't it?
It really is.
And what comes first what behavior steps in first, but you kind of have to enmesh it, so it's the thing that comes forward first, isn't it?
And or sometimes not first, maybe they're hand in hand. And it's, our task in life really, I think, just as human beings, not just students, is, when the overwhelm arises for whatever it is, loss, grief, anxiety, identity crisis, whatever it is, can I be okay in it? That's all we want. And when anxiety kind of propels into full-blown panic attacks, in a way, we've given over to the fear, and we're more frightened of the anxiety than we are the thing that we were worried about in the first place, because it's the worst feeling in the body, isn't it? Anxiety.
So if we've got someone who's watching this who is a student or is, I guess, aware of a student who's struggling, I often do still recommend they kind of go and see their GP as a sort of first port of call. I've kind of been looking a lot at the Student Minds website as part of what we've been doing on student mental health this week. Is there any other sort of resources, or how do students access their counselling services normally? Is that an easy thing?
It's dead easy. It's self-referral. It's confidential.
Well, that's important, isn't it? Because I think some students feel that they shouldn't step into that because they worry it's going to come back badly on their
somehow.
course. It
isn't. It's very, very, very well supported, and actually supported by the university staff and academic staff as well. There's a great book. Workbooks, I think, are brilliant for students if they want to kind of get their hands dirty. The cognitive behavioural therapist, Christine Podesky, Mind Over Mood, is a great workbook to work through some of those issues. This one, which is about acceptance and commitment therapy, get out of your mind and into your life. And what's brilliant about that is it is cognitive therapy. It is philosophy, so that existential take on life, and mindfulness. And it's a workbook, so they can kind of
work through it.
And I say, habit, be engaged with it, write these things down, gain that distance from it, and be curious. And my final book, really, with whatever, and I've recommended this a lot over the last 2 years, No Mud, No Lotus by the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, is a wonderful discussion. It's a tiny little thin book. It's brilliant. But it's about how, you know, anxiety is a part of life. You know, we don't get the lotus blossom without the mud. You know, they kind of coexist. We need them both. So how do we be with that and be okay? It's not about eradicating it. How can I be okay with it?
Yeah. Great. Lovely. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting. I try and keep these really short because I think.
Oh, no, thanks for asking me.
But people can find you as the existential therapist.
Experiential therapist. Yeah, and there are some free articles on there as well.
And I'll put that on our social media. And if anyone's got any questions afterwards, I'm always happy to be asked. Thank you, Julie.
Brilliant. Nice to see you, Claire. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.